Hey there, this is Ross Izzard. This is the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast, where we talk about fly fishing in more interesting places without wearing waders. So this episode is entitled, I Hate Waders and So Should You. And I understand that might be offensive for some folks, because some people believe that you actually cannot fly fish without waders. If I had $1 for every time I have seen somebody hanging out in a river in the middle of the summer, it's like July, and it's 90 degrees outside, 80 degrees outside, whatever, it's hot, the water's warm, and they're wearing chest waders. It boggles my mind. And all I can think about as I drive by them is like, you've got to be so very uncomfortable. And it makes me so happy that I spend so much of my time in the warmer months wet wading. Doesn't mean that you can't do it if you want to. Of course you can. But should you? I don't know. Maybe not if you want to have the best possible and most comfortable, most connected experience. And I get questions about wet wading all the time. I mean, all the time. In fact, I would say that it is probably right up there with the most frequently asked questions that I receive. People who want to understand what wet wading means. People who want to understand what kind of gear you need to go wet wading. People who would like to understand how you integrate wet wading, in which you're obviously getting wet, right? Thus the name, with hiking and with being outside and staying dry and being comfortable on the trail or at camp or whatever else. And it's something that I think is worth addressing. Now, we have talked about wet wading on the podcast before. As part of other episodes related to fishing in the spring, a little bit of fishing in the fall, some other stuff where it's been thrown in. And we've probably at some point in some form or fashion touched on much of, although probably not all of, what we're going to talk about today. But I think it would be helpful to just lay out sort of the theory and the philosophy of wet wading for folks, as well as all the stuff that I think you need to have and to know and to be prepared for, to be able to go and do it safely and effectively so that you can have an awesome time on the water. So that is what we're going to do today. Before we do that, if you haven't had a chance to review the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen, please do. That always helps. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Always love to see new listeners. It's been awesome to see how many people are coming on board with this crazy backcountry fly fishing thing that we do. And I'm always happy to hear from you, so feel free to shoot me a note. Best places to get me are DMing me on Instagram at the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast Instagram page, or to just shoot me an email at backcountryflyfishingpodcast@gmail.com. Love hearing from you guys. Keep sending ideas for episodes, questions, pushback, feedback, whatever you might have. It's always great. So appreciate all of you guys. Thank you for listening, and always happy to keep that engagement going wherever we can. Now, on the subject of wet wading, let's talk about the biggest question related to wet wading that I see, which is, what the hell is wet wading? Okay, and there's a lot of confusion about this, surprisingly. It seems like a topic where a lot of people assume that you know what they mean when they say wet wading, but that's not necessarily always the case. And if you don't have a really clear sense of what it means, this whole thing can be kind of confusing, because then you don't really know what you're doing, you don't know why you're doing it, you don't know what kind of gear you need, and that can be kind of tricky. So let's start with defining wet wading. And wet wading, for me, is defined as any sort of wading where your body, and by you, I mean you specifically, your skin, your body, gets wet in the water. And it doesn't matter if it's in a river, it doesn't matter if it's in a lake, really doesn't matter what you're doing. The point is that you do not have an impermeable waterproof barrier between you and the water. You are actually getting wet in the water. And that is the hallmark of wet wading. It's why it's called wet wading, because you are actually getting wet in the water. And that means a few things. The first one, and I really genuinely do not say this to be an asshole, so please don't take it that way, is that you should expect everything that goes into the water in a wet wading scenario to get wet, right? So at a baseline, if you are wet wading, you are not wearing waders of any kind. You are not wearing waterproof things of any kind at all. Because, to be honest, if you did, it would be, at the very least, counterproductive, because they wouldn't actually keep you dry. And at the worst, possibly kind of unsafe and dangerous, because you're messing around with a system that is clunky and not really built for what you're trying to do out there. So I'm looking at you guys with your like knee-high wader-y sock things. Those are not what you're looking for here. You're going to get wet when you wet wade. And to be more specific, your pants are going to get wet when you wet wade. You should not be doing this in shorts. We will talk about that in a little bit here. But your pants are going to get wet when you wet wade. Your socks are going to get wet when you wet wade. Water is going to go into your boots, your wading boots, when you wet wade. All of those things are going to happen, and you are going to get actually wet, very wet, soaked, for at least from the knees down, maybe all the way up to your hips. That's what's going to happen. And so some people are like, well, okay, but if I get in that way, how do I keep water from going into my boots? You don't keep water from going into your boots. And they say, well, how do I keep my feet dry? Well, you don't keep your feet dry. You're going to get wet. That's what we're doing out there. And the follow-up question to that is usually, well, why would I do that? Right? The water is cold. These are trout streams that we're talking about in most cases, which means the water is probably pretty chilly in a lot of cases. It is potentially not the cleanest water you've ever been in. I mean, a lot of these pristine mountain streams are remarkably clean, but they're not sterile, right? These are not processed streams. It's not obviously potable water. It's not something that you can drink straight out of. And it does have bugs and bacteria and viruses and animal poop and all sorts of dead things, all sorts of stuff in there, because that's just the way that water works in nature, just is. And they're like, well, I don't really want to get dirty like that. And that's okay. If you really, really feel like that's just not for you and you really need to be dry because that's just what you want to do, or if you just don't want that yucky water on you, there is part of me that's like, well, I mean, we are out there engaging with nature. Nature's not always clean. You're going to get the water on you anyway. I've never been terribly offended by that, but if you are, then more power to you. You can do what you like and do what makes you the most comfortable. But all of those things are sort of, in my view, relatively small trade-offs compared to the bigger why of what we wet wade. Okay, and there are a couple of reasons for why I choose to wet wade literally as early in the season as I possibly can. I ditch my waders as soon as I can. I drop the chest waders for a pair of wading pants, like actual wader pants, hip waders, for a little while in the early season, and then I drop those entirely too. And I just stop wearing waders until probably sometime the end of September or October even, when it starts getting cold enough to justify having them back on. And the reason for that at a very basic level is just comfort. Waders are really not all that comfortable. It doesn't matter if you have the very tippy top of the line waders. I have some of those myself. I've tried many of them. Or the baseline level of waders. You are probably not going to be incredibly comfortable in them, especially in warm environments. Now, the really expensive waders that have breathable materials and a whole bunch of fancy tech built into them, will they be more comfortable than the less expensive ones? Yes. Will those be better than like a pair of old school neoprene waders? Yeah, for sure. In fact, I would rather be dead than fish in neoprene waders in the summertime or in the warmer months at all. But you're dealing with degrees of discomfort, right? Like these might be less uncomfortable than the others. They might make you sweat less. They might be a little less gross. They might lead to a little less swamp ass at the end of the day. And that's all fine. Those are all legitimate things that I think about when I get waders too. But they're still not really comfortable, right? You're probably still hot, especially if the air temps are up, let's say in the mid 60s to 70s, and then they start climbing from there. You're probably going to be pretty warm in those things, and they can get kind of uncomfortable. They're also restrictive, right? No matter how nice your waders are, the fact of the matter is you just don't have the same level of dexterity in your feet or your legs or really any of your joints, especially with full-blown chest waders, that you do without them. It's almost like I sometimes feel when I'm scrambling over rocks or taking a big step over a log or something, I feel like I'm stuck. Like the waders have me sort of stuck and I can't really move very much with them. And I figure it out, but my range of motion is limited, and you definitely are sort of less mobile than you would be without waders. And then beyond that, they're just sort of heavy and clunky, right? Even the nice lightweight waders, this is part of why I use those sort of hip waders / wading pants that are not full-blown chest waders. They're pretty big. They're pretty bulky. They can have quite a bit of weight in them, sometimes 2 or 3 pounds, depending on what kind of waders you have or more. And that can be really tough to deal with from a gear perspective, because now you're talking about either packing and hiking in the waders, which I do a lot in the wintertime, or doing what I see a lot of people do, which is actually hiking in their waders, like they're wearing their waders on the hike in and hike out. You really don't want to do that, especially if it's hot. It is incredibly uncomfortable. You will potentially give yourself some type of heat related injury, heat stroke, or heat exhaustion, or something else. And even if you don't have that happen, it's like hiking with trash bags on you, even in nice, expensive waders. It's really not something you should ever do. Now, if you're just going to be walking a few miles down the stream and you're not going too far from the car, that's fine. Walking in waders you can get away with, but actually hiking, so we're talking elevation gain, distance, rough terrain, you do not want to be doing that in waders. You will have a bad time. I 100% guarantee you. And all of those things sort of add up to this general level of discomfort when it comes to waders. And that discomfort is the single biggest baseline reason for why I don't want to wear waders unless I absolutely have to. I hate them for all of these reasons. But there's also another reason that I don't really like wearing waders, and this one is a little bit more philosophical. And you might say I'm a crunchy granola hippie, and that's okay. Maybe I am. I find that waders, because they are creating a barrier between you and the environment, between you and the water, are they're just much less personal. They provide a less personal experience in the water than you get when you are wet wading. You're not really experiencing the temperature of the water. You're not fully feeling all of the current of the water. You're not really in the water at all. There's something between you and the water. And I have always found that a little bit disconnected. It feels like it reduces my level of tactile and sort of sensory connection with and understanding of the water that I'm in. Now, in the wintertime, that's a good thing, because if you were to have that experience in the wintertime, you would probably be hypothermic and have frostbite. So in those cases, you really don't want to be cuddling up with the water and experiencing that directly on your skin. But in the warmer months, that's not really the case. And I find that when I am out fishing, particularly streams and creeks at lower elevations, this can vary a little bit by elevation. We should say that. The higher up you go, the colder it stays. So even if you're hiking in the middle of July or sometimes August up to a high alpine lake or a creek at very high elevation or whatever, it might be a headwater stream, there are cases where those environments are going to be cold enough, both as far as air temperatures and water temperatures, that you're probably still going to want waders, right? So if you ever try to wade a lake at like way up over 12,000 feet, that water is really, really, really cold, even in the summer. And it's maybe not a bad idea to have waders with you for that stuff. But if you're dealing with relatively normal elevation profiles, water that is not in these sort of extreme alpine environments, then I really like to be in the water. I want to feel the water on my skin. I want to experience direct physical connection with the stream and with the water that I'm fishing. And you might say, well, that's kind of a weird thing, Ross. Why are you being so woo-woo? And okay, that's fair. But for me, it really increases my level of investment in and interaction with the environment, right? So the same way that I feel more connected to my environment when I can take a deep breath and smell the pine trees around me, or the smell of dirt, as odd as that sounds. The same way I can feel the wind on my skin and sort of feel the breeze and the temperature shifts that come along with it. The way that tree bark feels on my hand when I'm coming around a bend on the trail and I lean on a tree to stabilize myself. The way that a wet rock feels in my hand when I pick it up to check it out. Or the way that a fish feels in your hand when you're handling them or unhooking them or releasing them. Those sort of sensory experiences are really important because I think they ground you in the place. They let you know that it's real. They allow you to interact with these places in a way that is very bodily and is very physical and is very direct, as opposed to being sort of protected from or shielded from them. And I find that to really increase my level of enjoyment of what I'm doing. I feel like I am in that environment. I am immersed in the environment, literally, in this case. I am experiencing that for myself. I'm feeling it for myself. And that is a really personal way for me to connect with these waters and these streams. Now, you can decide that that's crazy talk and I should go back to living in my teepee and doing hippie dances. And that's okay. We don't all have to feel the same way about it. But I will tell you, between the weight issue of trying to hike in these waders, dealing with putting them on, the comfort issues that I have with them in the warmer months, and this sort of desire for more physical grounding and connection in the environment, I'm not coming off of wet wading to the point that I actively look forward to wet wading season and cannot wait to take my waders off and hang them up and hopefully not look at them again for 6 months or so. So I'm pretty bought in on this thing. And you can decide how bought in you are one way or the other. You can always decide whether or not you want to wet wade. You don't have to at all by any stretch of the imagination. But if you do, there are some really good reasons for you to feel that way. And if you haven't done it before, if you're one of those guys who's wearing waders no matter what, everywhere you fish all the time, unless you have a really, really, really compelling reason to do that, a medical condition, some other safety consideration, whatever it might be, then I would really encourage you to try wet wading. You can do it in a safe place if you need to. You can do it in your local creek or local stream. You can try to find a place that minimizes risk so you're not getting wet 10 miles into something and then hoping for the best. But try it out. See how you feel. And I would be willing to bet that probably the vast majority of you are going to really like it if you haven't done it before. So don't rule it out. Come join me in the wet wading mafia. I think you're really, really going to like it if you have the right stuff. And that's what I want to talk about next is the gear that you need to go wet wading. You don't have waders with you. That's kind of the point, as we said. So you're not dealing with that. You are not dealing with all the stuff that goes with waders. So wearing like underneath your waders, what do you wear? Your sort of wading pants or anything else that goes with having waders on you. You're obviously not dealing with that. But that doesn't mean that you don't have gear of some kind, because you do. Everything requires gear when you're outside. And that is the same for wet wading as it is for fly fishing or almost anything else that you would do. The good news is that gear is much easier to work with. It's less expensive, which is also a plus. It's easier to work with. It's more packable. It certainly weighs a lot less, and it's much less annoying. And so I want to run through the sort of gear items that you need to be thinking about as you think about wet wading this spring and this summer. And the very first thing is your pants. And people don't spend a lot of time thinking about their fishing pants. I sometimes see people in the middle of nowhere in blue jeans, and I don't recommend that you wear denim outside. It's not really made for what we're doing, but if you want to, knock yourself out. I see other people who are wearing sort of like heavy canvas khaki pants, and again, not necessarily wrong. They're certainly durable. They can take a lot of abuse, but they're not the best option if you're going to be hiking and moving, and particularly if you're going to get wet. And so I really have sort of gravitated over the years, and I've tried all of these things, by the way, so no shade. Trust me, if it's out there, I've probably tried it and realized it didn't work. I've started to gravitate toward hiking pants. And when I say hiking pants, I mean stuff made out of sort of that water-resistant, but still breathable material that's tough and durable, also able to get wet, really, really flexible. A lot of these things have like articulated knees that are specifically sewn in a way that the seams and the joints are designed to allow maximum freedom of motion. And they are designed, obviously, for hiking and for scrambling and for being outside. And so they work in that capacity when you're hiking in or hiking out or dealing with access to the water. But they also work really, really well in the water. And the reason for that is that they are sort of the perfect blend of characteristics. A really good pair of hiking pants, and I'll just come out and say right out of the gate, the hiking pants that I wear every single time I hike, seriously, into anything over the course of the warmer months, are Wrangler ATGs. They are inexpensive, they are easy to find, they're easy to buy, they're not going to cost you an arm and a leg, and they're insanely durable. I actually have still, to this day, I have a pair of these, several pairs of these that I've worn for like 4 seasons, which means that they have probably been on my legs hundreds of times in really rough environments, and they've never ripped, they've never torn, they've never split. I've never had a failure of these pants, no matter how much abuse I put them through. They're also really light. They're breathable enough to be cool when it's hot outside. They're warm enough to provide a little bit of insulation when it's cold outside, and they dry super fast. So they're really not water resistant. I suppose they might have some really basic waterproof materials and waterproof characteristics from the synthetic stuff that they use in them, but they're really not waterproof. Instead, they are designed to dry quickly. And that's really what you want, right? Waterproofing is not going to help you because you're going to get wet anyway. It wouldn't make sense to wear waterproof pants that are open in the river because you're just going to get soaked. But having something that dries quickly is important because eventually you're going to get out of the river and you might be hiking down, you might be camping, you might be moving on to a new spot. And being wet outside is not something you really want to do, right? You can get away with it for a while, but you don't want to spend all your time soaked in an outside environment because eventually it's going to get cold. And if it is cold, you can get yourself in some serious trouble. So starting out with the pants, you are going to want something lightweight, something breathable, something durable, and you're always going to want to wear them. I really can't stress this enough. You do not ever want to wear shorts in a river because, number one, they provide absolutely zero protection for your skin. So knocking your shins against rocks, ripping them across logs, getting caught on sticks, hooking yourself, whatever it might be, they provide no help and no protection at all on that front. And that's something that you really do have to think about as you are doing this wet wading thing that we're talking about. And on top of that, if you're hiking in shorts, you don't know what's going to happen, right? You can get ticks all over your legs in certain parts of the country. Again, you can cut yourself, you could get ripped up, you could get sunburned. There are a million reasons that I don't really think you should ever be outside without long pants on. I really truly believe that. I experimented with shorts for a while. I had that phase of my journey, and then I realized, no, it need to be long pants. And if you're going to be wet wading, they really need to be something like the Wrangler ATG if you would like to be comfortable and to have a good time. So once you've got your pants dialed in, the next thing you're going to need is a pair of wool socks. And listen, I talk about wool socks so much on this podcast that we might as well call it the Backcountry Wool Socks podcast. Like we're always talking about wool and wool socks in particular because wool is amazing. It's like the best outdoor material out there. In fact, it's the base layer for me almost all the time. Like I won't put anything on my feet when I'm outside unless it is wool. And often in the colder months, I won't have anything on my entire body that's not made out of wool. So I love this stuff. And you're going to need a pair of wool socks to do wet wading correctly. And I'll explain more about that here in just a second. But you got to have your wool socks. Doesn't matter what kind of wool socks they are. You don't need special wet wading wool socks. You don't have to spend a ton of money on them. But you do need wool socks. And then you're going to need a pair of neoprene wading socks. These are socks that are designed to go inside your wading boot. They're usually like 2 to 3 millimeters of neoprene, and they are just straight up neoprene, like a wetsuit or like old school waders. They're not breathable. They don't have any type of feature set. They're just straight up neoprene. You're going to need a pair of those too. And I'm going to give you a hint about these that matters, which is that you don't really need to use them in a way that's super fancy, right? So there are neoprene socks out there that come with like a little hook at the top so you can fold them down over your boots and use that as a gravel guard, kind of the same way that you would with your waders. If you want to do that, you can. I actually believe that the best way to wear wading socks is to put them on your feet and then pull them all the way up your calf. And a lot of these wading socks, if you're getting the right size, which we should mention sizing, you don't want these to be too tight. You really don't. You want them to be tight enough to not be bunched up and baggy in your boots, but you don't want them so tight that they're uncomfortable or cutting off circulation or you can't get them on or off your feet. You don't want that. But assuming they're sized right, you want to pull them all the way up to the top of your calf for a couple reasons. Number one, the neoprene will help retain some heat because they're not very breathable. And once the water gets in there, when you're wet wading, kind of like a wetsuit, they will hold it close to your skin. The neoprene will hold that sort of heat in and you will stay warmer. But also, because you're wearing 2 to 3 millimeters of pretty soft, squishy material on your legs, you now have a cushion for your shins and for your legs. And that's really important because when you're wading, I cannot tell you how many times I have slammed my shin into some kind of flat-edged rock and been out there just cussing and hopping around. You're climbing over stuff. You're walking through the forest. There's a lot of stuff that could hit your legs. It could bruise you. It could rip you. It could knock you. It could do a whole bunch of other things. And you really don't want that at all. So wearing those socks pulled all the way up, even if they have the gravel guard, is the way that I do it. I think it is the most useful way to wear the socks. You can do whatever you like, but my experience has been that that is the right way to use the neoprene wading socks. Now, also related to these socks, you do not ever want to put neoprene wading socks directly on your bare feet. And I think people get stuck on this sometimes. Those wool socks that I mentioned earlier, those go on your feet directly. You put them on your feet the same way you put your socks on in the morning. And then you grab your wading socks, the neoprene wading socks, and you put your already socked feet inside the neoprene wading socks. Why do you do this? Well, number one, the wool will provide a little bit of additional insulation. Remember that one of the cool things about wool is that it retains a lot of its insulative value even when it's wet, so it's perfect for being in the water. Number two, it will stop sort of chafing and rubbing and weird, gross, sweaty situations in your neoprene socks because the wool sort of pulls some of the moisture away. It gives a little bit of a barrier. It provides a little bit of relief from the friction. It's going to keep you more comfortable that way. And then on top of that, it will make getting the neoprene socks on and off so much easier. If you ever try to put a pair of these onto your bare feet, it is almost impossible. And same thing for pulling it off. Once your skin gets even a little bit wet, sweat or the water or anything else, it becomes nearly impossible to put these things on or to take them off. And so the wool socks also help with that. And to answer one of the questions I get most often, people are like, well, yeah, but what happens if the wool gets wet inside the neoprene? The answer is nothing. Nothing happens. The wool will get wet inside the neoprene. In fact, that's the whole point. You are going to want to wear wool socks specifically because they're going to get wet while you're wet wading inside the neoprene. That is okay. It is a desired result. It is definitely an intended result. It is a predictable result. Again, we are wet wading, which means you will get wet, and that includes the wool socks that you have down inside your neoprene socks. That is functioning as intended. You don't need to stress about it. Then you need your wading boots, right? And this is a long conversation. I mean, maybe at some point we'll do a whole episode about boots, but there are a lot of really good wading boots out there. It's a trade-off between durability and weight. It's a trade-off between which types of soles you want to use and convenience. It deals a lot with where you're going to be and what kind of rivers you're working with and what the substrate looks like and the rock structure and everything else. So we don't necessarily need to get into specific pairs of boots today. We'll save that for another time. But you are going to need dedicated wading boots. And I want to really highlight this. These are wading boots, not hiking boots, not tennis shoes, not trail runners, definitely not the boots that you hiked in with. These are dedicated wading boots. They are a little bit bigger than your regular boots to accommodate that sort of double sock with the wool sock and the neoprene socks that we just talked about. They have drains in them designed to let that water drain out of the shoe so that you are not walking around with puddles inside your shoes and a bunch of weight that you don't need all day. And they are designed really specifically to get wet and to support you and give you the grip you need while you're wading. So you're going to need a good pair of wading boots too, and that's critical. So now you've got your wool socks, then the neoprene socks on top, and then those go right down in your wading boots the same way you would with once you've sort of suited up with your stocking foot waders. You lace up the boots, you tie them tight, and bada bing, bada boom, you are ready to go fish. And that kind of covers it for all the stuff that you're going to need to actually get in the water for wet wading. But there's another side to this, which is that you're not always going to be in the water, right? Obviously, you would prefer to hike in dry. And you would probably prefer to hike out dry. And that means that you also need to carry dry stuff. And this is really important. Okay, so you really don't ever want to hike with wet feet or wet boots at all, ever. If you absolutely can't avoid it, you can do it. I've been there. It's doable, but it sucks. It's miserable. It makes your feet disgusting. It can lead to crazy blisters and huge issues. You really don't want to do that. You want your socks and your hiking boots to be dry at all times. And that means that you are going to be wearing dry wool socks into the water when you're hiking in, dry hiking boots into the water when you're hiking in, and then you're going to want to wear those same dry socks and dry boots hiking out, which means that you do not want your wool socks to be the same wool socks that you are going to wear in the water underneath your neoprene socks when you are wet wading. You don't want that. You do not want your boots to be the same boots that you are going to wear in the water when you are wet wading. You're going to want these to be separate items. And that means that you are carrying 2 pairs of socks, 2 pairs of wool socks at least, and 2 pairs of boots with you when you are out there. And you might also be carrying an extra pair of pants. I almost always have an extra pair of hiking pants rolled up in the bottom of my bag, just in case I get really soaked and for whatever reason I can't dry out or I get too cold, just so I can change clothes quickly. I always have a change of clothes in my pack. Day pack, overnight pack, doesn't matter. I always have an extra pair of pants and an extra shirt and an extra pair of socks and an extra pair of underwear. Don't forget your underwear. We're not going to spend a bunch of time on that, but eventually your undies are going to get wet when you're wet wading, and hiking in wet underwear, whether you're a boy or a girl, is at the very best going to lead to some pretty gnarly hygiene situations down there. And at the worst can lead to some chafing and some blistering and some really unpleasant stuff that I'm sure you don't want to hear about here. But bring some extra underwear with you as well, because you might appreciate it later if your tighty whities get dunked. But you're going to want to have dry stuff. And I can't emphasize this enough, because I think people get wet wading correct, but then they forget to have dry stuff with them and they wind up being miserable and wet on the hike out. And that is not what you want to do. You need to have a dry pair of socks, a dry pair of boots at all times, and preferably a whole dry outfit for yourself when you're down there, whether you change into it or not. So don't forget that stuff. Now, the next question is, how do I hike in with all this stuff? I get this one a lot. People are like, okay, so I have all this stuff. I've got a good handle on the gear. How do I, what do I do? How do I hike in with all this stuff that I got to have with me? And it's a really good question. And the answer is that you are going to have to sort of make it work with your pack and with your system. It's going to vary by the type of pack that you have. It varies by what type of gear you're using. It's going to vary as far as like how it attaches, where it goes, what you want to do. Personal preference is obviously part of this as well. And it's not going to be the world's most glamorous solution. I can pretty much guarantee you that, but it is workable. And so I'm not going to necessarily tell you how you should do it, but I am going to tell you how I do it. And you can draw from that what you want. You can tweak what you want, and you can decide your own system for hiking when you're dealing with wet wading scenarios. Let me just give you an example here. So let's say that I am going to go for a 6-mile hike into a canyon to go fish, a backcountry canyon. And I'm going to be in there all day. I know I'm going to be wet wading, so I'm going to be in the water all day. And then I'm going to hike back out, maybe up the same route I went in on, maybe up a different route, doesn't really matter. I know that I'm going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 miles in and out to get to this stream, and then whatever distance I'm covering when I'm down there in the water wading. How do I set that up for my pack? Well, first things first, I'm going to get all my stuff ready the night before. It's all going to be organized. It's all going to be in a routine, just like we talked about last week. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to get geared up for hiking, right? So I'm going to put on my first dry pair of wool socks, and then I'm going to put on my dry hiking boots, and then I'm going to be ready to go hiking. So it's easy, right? You're just lacing up your boots, you're ready to rock. I am going to take my second pair of wool socks, the ones that I'm going to use for wet wading, and I am going to put them and my neoprene socks somewhere in my pack. It doesn't really matter where in the pack you want them to go. If you have a waterproof compartment in your backpack, that's awesome. That's a perfect place to put them. If you don't, you can put them in a very small waterproof sleeping bag sack or something else. It doesn't matter that it's waterproof on the hike in, but it will definitely matter on the hike out, because you don't want that wet stuff getting all over your things. And we'll talk more about that here in a minute. But you're going to carry your extra pair of wool socks and your neoprene socks into the river with you, either in that dry bag attached to your bag externally or somewhere inside the bag. Just make sure you have somewhere to carry them out later when they are wet. And then you are going to take your wading boots. So what I do is I take the boots and I'm going to just tie them together with a double knot, just like you would use on your shoes walking down the street if you didn't want to see your shoelaces come untied. And it's really important to use a double knot. If you use a single knot, I guarantee you eventually you'll be walking through something, caught on a bush, not paying attention, whatever might happen, and you will wind up with your boot laces coming untied and you losing your boot somewhere in the woods. And if it's on the way in, that means you don't get to fish today. That sucks. Or I guess you could go fish with wet feet in your hiking boots, but that's terrible and really not something to be considered in my humble opinion. Or if you lose them on the way out, then you've lost your wading boots and you're faced with the choice to either hike back in and look for them everywhere, which is kind of a shitty proposition after a long day of fishing, or you got to go buy new boots, which is also a bummer. So wherever you tie them on, you need to make sure this is in a very secure cinched down double knot. That's important. As far as where you're actually going to put them on your pack, this depends on what kind of pack you're using. I've seen people just sort of tie them to a carabiner and let them swing freely. I've seen folks put them through D-rings. I've seen them put them on like Molly systems. You can do whatever you want, but I will say that the best thing for you to be thinking about is sort of weight distribution of the boots and minimum swinging, minimum motion of the boots. You really want that with your pack with all things. You don't want stuff swinging around because it starts to create imbalances. Number one, it's annoying. Number two, it can create these sort of weird micro imbalances that over time can really mess with your body and your comfort when you're hiking. And number three, the more stuff swings around, the less secure it is, the more likely it is something will go wrong. Shoelace will snap, knot will come untied, even if it's double knotted, and you might lose the gear, which is not great. So I like to tie these to my bag as close to the top as I possibly can. And very often I'll tie them to the carry handle of the backpack, that little handle at the top that you can use to pick it up, or the closest thing to it. If it's a strap up there, that's fine. If it's a clip up there, that's fine. But I like to carry these as high up on the pack as I can. I don't like to tie them on the bottom of the pack because then they're swinging and kind of literally kicking you in the butt the whole way in and the whole way out, which is highly, highly irritating. This way they are up there. I put one boot on the right side of the bag, one boot on the left side of the bag, and then I tie them tightly enough that they sort of stay there on the bag. So now you've got the weight distributed on either side of your bag. They are securely tied to your bag. You've got your wading socks, you've got your neoprene socks, and now you are ready to go hike in. So you're going to go hike in to the river. Let's say I'm back in the same canyon. It's 6 miles in there. I get down to the bottom. Now what? Well, I'm going to find a nice sunny rock. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to take off my dry hiking boots that I hiked in with. I'm going to take off the dry wool socks that I hiked in with. I am going to put those wool socks either inside my bag where they cannot get wet, or I will tuck them all the way down into the toes of the hiking boots. Why do I tuck them all the way down to the toes? Because if you don't and you're lazy and just kind of stuff them into the neck of the boot, they will eventually fall out and you will either have to hike out with wet socks or no socks. Both of those will give you blisters that will make you wish that you were dead, and you really want to avoid that at all costs. So you're going to secure those dry socks somewhere. You're going to take out your neoprene socks and your wet wading wool socks. You're going to untie and disattach your wading boots from your pack. And then you're going to do all of this in reverse. You're going to tie your dry hiking boots to your pack in exactly the same way that you had your wading boots tied on, whatever way that might be. As I said, you're going to stash those dry socks somewhere where they can't get wet and can't get lost. And then you're going to suit up to go wet wading. So you're going to put on your wet wading wool socks. You're going to pull on your neoprene waders. You're going to put on your wading boots. You're going to rig up your rod, hop in the water, and now you're fishing. And you're going to fish that way for the entire day. And I think this is where people sometimes get a little bit haywire. People are like, well, doesn't that mean that you're carrying your hiking boots with you all day on your backpack? Yes, it does mean that. And like, well, why would you do that? Why don't you just stash them and then go back and get them later? And there are two answers to that. The first one is that because of the way that I fish, I very often am not ending in the same place where I started. I might be hopping in and jumping out of the river several miles away. And I don't want to have to walk all the way back to that place to get my boots in wet wading boots because they're really not made for hiking and it won't be comfortable. Or I might not even be able to. There are certain places and certain canyons and certain waters where you're going to enter at one point, you're going to fish through a bunch of stuff, and there really is not a realistic way for you to get back to where you started. So, for instance, this canyon that I'm thinking of now, you hop in by this massive rock formation, you fish upstream for quite a ways, and then you're getting out in a totally different place 3 or 4 miles further upstream. And there's really no route back. I mean, unless you want to wade and backtrack all the way back up the river where you came from, which I definitely don't because it's rough in there. Or if you want to hike out up this exit path and then hike all the way back down to where you started and get your stuff and then hike all the way back out, which I don't, then you're not going to have a chance to go back and get them. And then on top of that, there might be situations where you need to get the hell out of there anyway. So let's say that, a huge storm rolls in or the water conditions go crazy on you, or maybe you get a message on your satellite device, your Garmin, from your family that there's an emergency and you need to get the hell out of there and get home. Maybe you just don't want to be there anymore and you just are ready to go, whatever it might be. You might need to leave at some point. And that means that at any point along that journey, you may want to have your hiking boots so you can put them back on and start to hike out without having to go all the way back and burning a bunch of time and energy and comfort to go back to where you stashed them. So yes, they are attached to my pack all day. Now, look, is that an extra 3 to 4 pounds of weight on my back all day? Yes, it is. Is it a problem? As long as they are secured to the bag the right way and not swinging wildly? No, I don't think it's a problem. It's never bothered me. It's not an issue for me. I'm wearing my pack all day for many of the same reasons that I don't stash my boots somewhere else. I also don't stash my pack somewhere else, because if you leave all of your safety and survival gear and extra gear somewhere else, then it can't help you if you actually get in trouble. And it's not a factor for me. So yes, I have hiking boots tied onto my backpack all day. I just do. Okay. I'm going to fish all day. And when I'm done, I'm going to get out of the river, wherever that happens to be. And I'm going to sit down. I'm going to strip off my wet wading boots. I'm going to dry them out as best as I can, including possibly turning them upside down and putting them in the sun for a couple of minutes. I'm going to pull off my wet neoprene wading socks. I'm going to pull off the wet wool socks from inside of those. And then I'm going to let my feet dry out for a minute. And this is where some people get stuck. They immediately go try to put on their dry socks in the pack. Well, if you put wet feet into dry socks, guess what? Now you have wet socks, and you've kind of defeated the purpose. So I'm going to let my feet just air out. And by the way, this is glorious. It's so, oh my God, the feeling of air and sun and just sort of exposure on feet that have been in the water for that long is so nice. You're going to like it. Trust me, it's an incredible feeling. I won't say what it feels like because it wouldn't be appropriate, but it's not far off of that. And I'm going to let my feet air out while I take off my dry hiking boots from the bag, get out my dry socks, set them to the side, stow my wading socks and my wet wool socks either inside a waterproof compartment in the bag or inside that waterproof carry sack that I mentioned, so that they don't get everything else in the pack soaked, because they will. If you put wet socks into your pack or even on your pack, at the end of the day, they will absolutely soak through and soak whatever else is in the bag. Jackets, clothing, equipment, fire starters, fishing stuff, whatever. It's going to get wet. So put it in the waterproof compartment. And then I'm going to take my wet wading boots and I'm going to tie those back onto my backpack at the top in the same way that I did when I was hiking in. Now, they're wet, obviously. The boots, even if you let them dry out for a minute, are still going to be wet. So the outside of your pack is going to get dirty and wet. That's okay. You want to be sure that you don't have stuff right up against the fabric of your pack where those boots are hanging, because it will probably get wet if you don't have a water resistant backpack or you don't have a backpack made out of materials that are water resistant. But if you do have a backpack that has water resistant materials, this is less of a factor. And that's one of the reasons that I really think your backpack should be at least splash resistant. It doesn't have to be fully waterproof. And in fact, in most cases, I'm really not an advocate for fully waterproof backpacks. I think they're super inconvenient unless you absolutely have to have them. But water resistant stuff is really helpful. And water resistant fabric is super helpful so that you don't have this stuff soaking through from your boots. And you're going to tie those back on. By the time you're done with this, your feet should be dry-ish. Now you're going to put on your dry wool socks. You're going to put on your dry hiking boots. You're going to shoulder that pack. And now you get to hike out with nice, warm, dry, happy feet. On the hike out, your pants are going to dry out. So it's almost never a factor for me. If for whatever reason you can't dry out or you're cold or you need to, then you can change into that extra gear that you should have in the bottom of your backpack. And you're going to leave happy. Right? You're not going to leave cold. You're not going to leave soaked. You're not going to get crazy blisters. You're not going to have like World War I soldier trench foot going on your feet. You're going to be fine to be able to hike out comfortably and safely and in a way that is going to be the most efficient way you can possibly do it. Get back to your car, gear down, hop in, head home, happy camper. That is my system for how I get my wet wading stuff into the backcountry and then get it back out. Now, I talk to guys that are like, well, I don't care about hiking in wading boots. Okay. I mean, you can do that if you want. I really don't think you're going to like it if you're hiking long distances, but you can do that. I have other folks who have a different system who have talked to me about it, and I think that's fine too. But this is my system for wet wading. And wet wading is really important to me. So this is something I've done a lot of, and I've spent a lot of time sort of refining around how I do this. And once you do it long enough, it just kind of becomes muscle memory, like everything else in fly fishing. It's not super complicated, but it does require a little bit of learning. And once you have it nailed down, you just have your system, and it just becomes second nature. Hike in, take out boots, gear up, get in water. Like you just get used to it, and you do it the same way every time, speaking of the power of routine, and you are now a wet wading pro. And you get to enjoy the benefits of being in the water, feeling the water, being connected to the water, and being comfortable and safe on the trail. And that is an awesome, awesome thing. Now, some of you might wonder when I say warmer weather, warmer season, warmer months, what I mean by that, which is to say, what's the win of when we go wet wading? And I think I can help you with that. This is not rocket science, and it's not really science at all, to be honest with you. But the short version is that you want to wet wade when the air temps and the water temps are warm enough for you not to be excessively cold. And that can mean different things for different people. It obviously, some people have higher levels of cold tolerance than others. It obviously can be gear dependent, depending on what you're wearing. But there's something in there about balancing the fact that you're standing in cold water, coldish water. It's obviously warmer than it was in the winter, and it might be warmer depending on the stream. But you're balancing that with warmer air temperatures so that your core temperature, which is really what you care about, right? It's uncomfortable for your feet and your legs to get cold, but that's not concerning in and of itself. Your core temperature, sort of around your organs, that really matters. And you do not want that to drop really at all, because even after a degree or two, you're hypothermic and having a bad time. And so my general rule of thumb is this. Once I suspect that the water temperatures are at about 45 or above, I have wet weighted streams down to 40 or 42. I would not recommend that. Those couple of degrees really make a bigger difference than you think they will, and they can be very uncomfortable. So I'm usually looking for water temperatures that are 45 and up. 50 and up is even better and even warmer. And air temperatures that are at least 65 or higher. Now, this depends on a lot of stuff, right? If it's raining in 65, that's kind of a different equation than if it's sunny in 65. Obviously, the warmer the outside temperatures are, the warmer the air temperatures are, the warmer the water temperatures are, the more likely it is that you're going to have a good time wet wading. But I usually am in a spot where if the water is, let's say, 48 degrees, and I suspect it's going to be 48 degrees. Obviously, you don't know until you get there and take a temperature reading. But you sort of know from experience, or roughly expect that that water is in that range. You know that the forecast for the weather that day is that it's going to be 75 and sunny, or even 80, 85, 90 and sunny. That's a pretty good place for you to be wet wading. And obviously, as the hotter the water gets, the easier this becomes, right? By the time you're standing in water that's like approaching 60, that water is actually pretty warm. It's not warm, but it's kind of warm enough that you're really not going to feel cold in it. If you're wading something that is, you know, 60-degree water and 90-degree air temperatures, then you're going to be pretty comfy. In fact, you might actually be hot and grateful to be in the water at that point. But that kind of combination is really what I'm looking for when I'm making a decision about whether or not I'm going to wet wade. Water temperatures being above 45, ideally above 50, and air temperatures being at least 65 and ideally closer to 70 or up. That's primo supremo wet wading territory. And you can bet I'm going to be in the river bare-legged at that point. Well, maybe not bare-legged, but I'm not wearing waders, put it that way. So that should kind of help you figure out when and under what circumstances you would want to wet wade. And I'm going to throw one more safety caveat on there, which is that please don't wet wade if you are in a seriously cold environment. So like if you're wet wading water that's 40 degrees and you're wet wading it in air temperatures that are also 40 degrees or even 50 degrees, now you're not being smart anymore, right? Now it's not connection with nature. Now it's not a better way to experience the water. Now you're risking hypothermia and exposure in a way that is past the line of what is useful and well off into the space of something that could conceivably be dangerous to you. And you really don't want to do that. So don't be silly about that. There's really no upper limit as far as how warm things can be when you wet wade, but you don't really want to be pushing this too hard where you are wet wading situations that are cold enough to cause risk factors that you don't need. So as always, and as we always say on here, use your best judgment. Please don't be stupid about that. It doesn't make you tough. It doesn't make you extra strong or extra manly to wet wade in situations where you shouldn't. You don't get any bonus points for that, but what you might get is really, really, really cold to the point that you have to be evacuated or find yourself in a really dangerous situation. So you don't have anything to prove out there, guys. This is about enjoyment. It's not about proving how rugged you happen to be. So be smart about when and where and how you do this stuff. So guys, I think that'll wrap us up for today. I'm sure there's more we could talk about with wet wading. So if you have questions or thoughts, please feel free to drop me a note. Happy to chat more about it. But for today, that should give you what you need to sort of understand this concept and get you started in how to do it. Get out there, get back in the water, wet wade a little bit if you haven't before, or if you have, then dude, have fun because I'm going to be doing it too. I can't wait to get back in the river this week, and I hope you feel the same. So have fun out there, guys. Be safe. Stay wet. and I'll see you back here next week. Till next time, this is Ross. Maybe I'll see you out there. I just hope I don't see you hiking in waders.